Okay, all right. So I just have a few questions I need to ask you about the lab school and your experience when you were there.
Sure.
Okay. So, when did you attend the lab school?
From 1959 to 1967.
Okay. And so, what grades were those?
Fourth through senior in high school.
Okay. And do you remember like what the atmosphere was like when you were there?
Yes. Let's see. Western High was a little different than the public schools in that they were very, very small classes, and my parents felt as though I might get a better education by going to Western High. I moved here from Milwaukee, Wisconsin. My father was the personnel director at the porcelain plant here in town, and I attended third grade at Grant School, which is a public school. And my mother and father both felt as though there were more opportunities at Western High. For example, in fourth grade, they started teaching Spanish as a second language, and that in itself was kind of a major draw for my parents. I took Spanish, I hated it, and didn't really learn a lot. The atmosphere at Western High was a little bit elitist in that most of the students, the vast majority of the students, were either professors' kids or business people from the community's children. And I lived on a little farm in industry, and we moved to the farm in industry while I was attending fourth grade, and they made an exception and allowed me to continue to attend school at Western High, even though I lived out of Macomb, but I had to provide my own transportation. The classes were smaller, and we had team teachers, which in some cases was very nice. In middle school, from fourth grade on, we had team teachers. So there were two teachers in each classroom, which was kind of unique. Something that stands out as far as an atmospheric kind of thing is that there were a lot of observations by university students that were studying education. And so our classrooms would turn into television studios. They would bring in scaffolding and lights and big television cameras like these you would see on in a television studio, the great big ones. And there would be students encircling the classroom as the teachers would teach, and they would record those classes. So there are hours and hours and hours, or there were hours and hours and hours of recorded footage of the students. At first that was kind of uncomfortable, but then it became kind of a playful game that a lot of the students would play with the observers, would act out and do some kind of strange things. At least I did on occasion. I liked going to school at Western High, but there was quite a bit of competition. It was a very competitive atmosphere at Western High. And if you weren't an especially good athlete, or if you were a particularly good scholar, then you kind of didn't fit in very well. Those were the two criteria for fitting in at Western High.
Well, I guess that brings into my other question, like what kind of student were you when you were there?
I was, in some ways, a little bit rebellious, probably because of my insecurities, going to school there and, being in this kind of different world. I didn't wear the expensive clothes that a lot of the kids wore, and I wore a lot of hand-me-downs from my uncle, and so I felt somewhat out of place at times, but it was okay. It was okay. I think I was a pretty average student, although I was very engaged in the classroom. And I think when I hit my probably sophomore or junior year, that's when I started to blossom and really take an interest in my education. For a couple of reasons. I graduated in 1967, and the war in Vietnam had been roaring for some time, and I was very active in the peace movement, even in high school. And I was not interested in going to Vietnam. So I knew that going to college was pretty important to me. And so I started applying myself more and more as I got older and as I matured in school. Not that I ever really matured as much as some of my other classmates, but it was fun-loving, and I enjoyed school. I really enjoyed Western High, and I saw the benefits to the school very much so. There were a lot of different classes that were available there that were not available at the public schools. So yeah, I was a pretty good student.
So you were, you said you moved to industry, but you were in Macomb for school?
1 year.
A
year and a half. 1 year and a half. I went to third grade at Grant School, which is just up the street from here at the, what is this place called? Well, whatever the Adams Street Cafe. Grant School is up on the corner of Adams and Kelm, MacArthur.
Oh, the alternative school?
Yes, that was the public third. I don't remember if it was third, fourth, and fifth grade, and sixth grade, I'm not sure. But then I shifted to Western High the very next year in fourth grade, and then my parents bought a small farm in industry.
So do you notice like any significant differences in how Macomb and the general area was then and how it is now?
Oh yeah, a lot of significant changes. Like this area that we're visiting right now was, there were some student rentals in this area, but this is mostly homes with families. And most of the students either lived in the dorms at that time or lived in a few houses, rental houses sprinkled out through Macomb. But it wasn't anything like this. This northwest sector of the town has really changed dramatically. As far as the square was more vital. In the 60s, there were shops. Every building on the square was occupied with shops. They were vital shops. And of course, with the advent of stores, not mega stores, but large stores like Walmart and Kmart, what they've done is they've diminished the ma and pa kind of store. And Nelson's actually is one of the few stores that is still going today that was going back in the 50s, 60s, 40s. You know, it's a store that has been around for a long time. So that part has changed dramatically. I might also note that in terms of the atmosphere at Western High, my mother is from Eastern Germany, and she's a refugee of World War II. And, you know, some of the kids were kind of tough on me when they met my mother because she has a strong accent, and I was called Kraut a lot. So there was a lot of poking fun and whatnot.
Yeah.
But I guess that's kind of typical of any school experience. You know, some kids get razzed more than others. And the other thing that was very difficult was by living in industry and attending school in Macomb, I had this kind of split personality. I had friends in industry, I had friends in Macomb, and I never fully engaged in either culture because I was kind of split between the two.
Yeah.
But anyway.
So was Macomb like more, what was the differences in industry and Macomb?
Industry is a little miniature town, population 500. At that time it did have some businesses and whatnot, and it was much more vital than it is today. You know, the Midwestern area and these smaller towns have died out, you know, over the years. Macomb was where the action was, and I spent most of my time in Macomb.
Oh,
you know,
really?
so this is where I felt as though the action was in Macomb. Certainly, you know, I didn't make my first trip to Chicago until I was 18 years old. You know, I'd been a lot of places, been to St. Louis, and that's another thing I might point out. Western High had some very nice exposure trips for the students. I went to the Muni Opera when I was an 8th grader. I went to a lot of different historical sites, and the school would pay for those opportunities. And we'd use the same buses that the university students would use to go on football games and things like that. At that time, the university had their own bus service. But I always had to provide my own transportation to and from school. This is just school activities.
So were you the only person in your family to go to the lab school?
Oh yeah. My father was from the Upper Peninsula of Michigan. He went to school in a small school in Marquette, Michigan. My mother's from East Germany. Actually, it was Germany at that time. There was no East and West Germany. She's from a province called Silesia, and she went to boarding schools. And her life was very much different. She came from a very wealthy background, so she went to boarding schools since she was 5 years old. You know, that was in the era of children should be seen and not heard.
Yeah. So no siblings or anything like that?
I have one brother that did not go to Western High. He attended the small school in industry, and he actually went on to become a doctor, a veterinarian, and he's very, very successful.
So when you were in school, what was your least and your favorite subject?
Spanish.
What's the least?
Absolutely. I didn't like my teacher, and it was the same teacher taught all of the different classes until high school. And I retook Spanish because I needed an elective for graduation, and I thought, well, I've had 4 years of Spanish as a grade schooler, you know, I'll take that for an easy A. And I had a very nice teacher, Mrs. Mummers, who's a teacher in high school, and she's very nice.
And if that was your least favorite, what was your favorite subject?
Well, I had a couple of favorites. I really enjoyed social studies and sociology classes, and I certainly enjoyed the upper level high school English classes that were taught by Miss Buckley, who really encouraged a lot of creative writing and was was a great teacher, you know, and did wonderful things for students as far as opening their creativity, opening their voice, so to speak, as a writer.
So would you say that she was your favorite teacher and your Spanish teacher was your least favorite?
Actually, she was one of my favorites. The other favorite teacher was Mr. Hauk, and I actually took an industrial arts class when I was a freshman. And I had to actually petition to get in the class because when I met with the guidance counselor in 8th grade to set up my schedule for freshman year, I put down that I wanted industrial arts. And he said, well, you're not industrial arts material. Because oftentimes students that didn't do well in classes got shoved into home economics, got shoved into industrial arts. And I lived on a farm, and I thought industrial arts would provide me with some life skills that would benefit me and benefit my family. Things I would learn on as far as mechanics, and I'd learn about carpentry and whatnot. And I explained that to him, and he said, well, you know, you're college prep material. You don't belong in that class, which I thought was so weird. And my parents actually had to come into school and talk with the counselor to convince him that, yes, in fact, it was just fine for me to take industrial arts. So that's the long answer to your question. Mr. Hauk was the industrial arts teacher, and I learned so much from him. So much about so many things.
Might have to hold on for a second. I'll pause it.
Can you stop it?
All right, you can keep going.
Okay. That was a break for the machine.
All right, so
Mr. Hauk.
Yeah.
He was my favorite. He was definitely my favorite. And Miss Buckley that's the duo, the male and female favorites.
Then you were the least favorite.
Mrs. Castle, that was the Spanish teacher. And that's about it. I mean, I liked most of my teachers.
Yeah.
I really did, you know.
So since you you said you had to balance.
Mr. Paulding. No, I take that back. There was a male favorite teacher. Yes, Mr. Paulding. He was the orchestra teacher, and I played the violin and the cello and the upright bass. And Mr. Paulding was a very, very not so nice instructor. He would scream and yell at the kids, and he used all sorts of very aggressive language with kids, and he was a major turn-off to me.
So, since you had to balance, you said your friends in industry and Macomb, who were your friends in both, you can say either place, but like, do you remember like any
Oh, yeah.
friends in like the?
Oh yeah, I still have some of my friends from industry who are around, and I still have friends that I went to school with that are still around Macomb. See, I've lived in and around the Midwest most of my life, but I left here. I became a teacher, actually, as a result of the experiences I had in my high school exposure. You know, the really good teachers taught me about what I didn't think was right about the field of education and teaching. And the really good teachers were really excellent role models to me. And so I decided I wanted to be a teacher when I was probably a senior in high school. That was a goal of mine. And I took that very seriously. But as far as friends, I still have friends that are around here. I moved back here in 2007. I finished my career as an instructor at Illinois State University in Bloomington, and moved back here because my mother, who is very elderly and her health is not good, I was it. My brother's got his career and he's doing his thing, and I felt as though my family needed my support, and so I came back. I left the field early and decided to start drawing down my annuity.
So did you start out at Illinois State, or
No.
What did you do like after college?
After college, I sold used cars and new cars for a year and a half to make some money, to pay off some loans and get some money together, because I couldn't find a teaching job. I was offered a teaching job at Glenbrook South in Glenview in Chicago, but after them making me the offer and discussing the salary with me, I started looking around for an apartment, and I realized that I couldn't live in the community where I was going to teach because I couldn't afford the rent. So I was going to have to live 30 miles away or 15 miles away to be able to teach in Glenview. And I thought, this is crazy. Why would I want to teach in a community where I could not live?
Yeah.
And anyway, after a year and a half of selling cars and making quite a bit of money, actually, I moved to Kansas City, Missouri, and without a job, and I got a teaching job at Southeast High School in Kansas City. I was part of an integration team that was integrating the Kansas City public schools, because in '73 they were not integrated, and the federal government said that they needed to bus students to create a more integrated community and atmosphere. And Kansas City said, we're broke, we can't do it. So the feds gave them 2 years on a waiver and said, okay, you integrate your faculty. And when you integrate your faculty, then you figure out how you're going to pay for busing, but you will bus in 2 years. So when I got to Kansas City and interviewed at the superintendent's office, the superintendent was a very, very tall and strong African-American man. And when I walked in the office, he said, so you're Chris, you're that teacher from Illinois. And he said, you're white. And I said, yes, sir, but I prefer to think of myself as pink. And he said, you're male. And I said, yes, sir. And he said, and it says here you're a teacher. He said, how do you feel about teaching in an all-black classroom? And I said, sir, I'm looking for a classroom. I want to teach. And he said, you're hired. And to this day, I've always thought that I was hired, 1, because I was pink, 2, because I was male, and 3, because I happened to be a teacher. I stayed there for 3 years, and it was one of the most rewarding experiences in my life. It set the stage for my career as a teacher. I taught in country schools, I taught in suburban schools, I taught in inner city schools, and then I taught here at Western, or worked here at Western, from 1991 to 1998 in the Central Illinois Adult Ed Service Center, which provided staff development for adult education instructors in the field of GED preparation, family literacy, and English as second language training. And then I left here and went to Illinois State in 1998, and was there until 2007. And there I was the director of a professional development center for adult education called the The Center for Adult Learning Leadership. I had to think. It's been so long, I had to think. The Center for Adult Learning Leadership, call.
So, like, you went to the school all the way through your senior year of high school.
Yes.
So, like, did you all, like, intermingle with the Western students?
Oh, yeah.
Or did you get to, like, hang out with them?
To some degree. Of course, we had observations all the way through senior and high school, as far as university students coming in our classrooms. And one of the things that we had to do at least once in our lives at Western High was have a case study. And that's where students would come and actually build a case study on a student. And that was a much closer relationship with university students. I went through one of those when I was a senior. Usually those happened earlier than senior year in high school. Of course, Lakers were very popular back then, and there wasn't the partying in town that there is currently, and there certainly wasn't as much noise and the huge parties in the city that there is now, because it just didn't happen. But what happened was a lot of students would go to Argyle and have parties out there, Lakers, and so Western High kids, of course, wanted to copy, and I did drink in high school, and so, yeah, of course, we intermingled with college kids, sure.
What were Lakers? Like the basketball?
No, Lakers were parties at the lake.
Oh.
And usually they'd take a keg or they'd take a bunch of beer and a bunch of booze out there and just party, have a campfire. And so that's what a Laker was.
Oh.
I guess you don't do that anymore.
No, not anymore.
Now you have the famous Wheeler Street Bash.
Yeah, they're trying to shut that down too.
Yeah.
They're like, you can get a fine if you like it on Facebook.
Well, the ordinances that they passed are pretty strong.
Yeah.
Pretty strong. And, I wish you all well on that one.
I think they said the minimum fine is about $500 if you promote it in any way. So I wonder if that's going to happen this year.
There it goes up.
So, like, do you know why the school was closed?
Every state university in Illinois, Eastern, Western, Northern, Southern, University of Illinois, ISU, had a lab school. The only one that I know that's still open is the one at ISU. And I actually was an exchange student at ISU when they opened their new building, and I think it was in '61. And 2 students from ISU came over here, and 2 students from here went over there. And I lived there for a week. Why it was closed, I don't know. I suspect it was some sort of funding issue or something. I think that the lab schools provided a really, really great service to teacher education colleges and universities, because it was kind of a hands-on experience for students before they hit the classroom. And it was... Well, even though it was somewhat contrived, it was slightly real. When I say slightly real, there was a lot of acting that went on in the classroom. Students would act roles, and we used to enjoy acting out roles for the camera.
So, do you think Macomb in general, or the kids in Macomb now, do you think? Would you prefer if the lab school was still around? Do you think they would? We might have to pause for a second through that.
I think the lab school concept is still very, very viable. I really do. I think Macomb High offers a rich curriculum. There's no question about that. They have grown with the times, as all schools try to. Some are more successful than others. I hope this records.
Yeah, I hope so too.
It's pretty noisy.
I'll put it up a little bit.
And but yes, I do think it's still a very viable opportunity for students. And so many cost-cutting things have hit schools. That it's unfortunate, because teacher training is vital to the future of our country and the future of our public education.
So, I guess just wrapping up your whole experience there, I have 2 things. What were your the best and worst things about the school in general, and what were your best and worst memories at the school?
best experiences were the people that I had the opportunity to meet over the years. I met some great instructors. I met some great student teachers, really great student teachers that came to the lab school and would teach for units of instruction. And the instructor would basically turn his classroom or her classroom over to the guest teachers or the student teachers. The yang of that is that some of those student teachers were absolutely awful. They were terrible. And some of them really probably didn't belong in education. And one of the things that the students would do would be to try and push those student teachers to the limit of their patience and understanding. And some made it and some didn't. I remember a student teacher that came back after a student teaching experience of about a month. She left and she came back the next semester and said, I decided to drop out of education. I learned what I didn't want to do with my life. And thank you. And she thanked everyone. And we thought that was kind of weird, but it was real. It was very real. Let's see. Excellent classes, excellent core curriculum, excellent exposure opportunities that were not available to some of the public school kids. Our football games were played on Western Stadium. We had lots and lots of opportunities to intermingle and use university facilities for our training. One of the worst experiences for me was I was a pretty big guy. Being a farm kid, I probably weighed 30 pounds more than I do now, maybe more, maybe 40 pounds more than I do now, and I was very strong. And there was a lot of pressure to participate in athletics and a lot of pressure to participate in football specifically because the head coach, Harry Sockler, was famous in this area. I didn't really care for him very much, and of course there would be a lot of people that would jump down my throat for making that statement. But I didn't like that pressure to be a football player. I didn't like the pressure to only be, not only, to have as a key to success athletics, be such a kind of a dominant force for a male, especially a larger male, a stronger male. I will say that an awakening point for me was when I was in 8th grade and I walked through the training field with the students that were training for track and field, and I picked up an 8-pound shot and put it about 43 feet, and it was immediately signed up to go out for track. I lettered that year, and I lettered for the next 3 years in track. And that was kind of an ego boost for me, and it really helped me as far as other students to be accepted, which I think every student wants to be accepted. I think every human being wants to be accepted. Let's see, worst experiences, probably football. I didn't like football. Mrs. Castle's Spanish class, that was definitely a worst experience. She had this pat thing that she'd always say to me, Cristobal, cierra la boca, which means Cristobal, Chris, shut up. And I never, ever was told to shut up, by my parents. And I never had a teacher say shut up, Basically, it's shut your mouth, cierra la boca. And I certainly remember that because I heard it enough times. In summary, it was a pretty good experience. It really was. And would I do it again? Yes. And in some ways, that was definitely a foundation for me becoming a teacher, and becoming a teacher that was so interested in multiple intelligences and awareness of learning styles and teaching styles. And that was kind of an important aspect of my classroom. And I always created a classroom of mutual respect. And I always felt that for the most part at Western High.
So, is there anything else like you would want anyone to know about yourself or the lab school?
I turned out pretty good, and I didn't go to Vietnam, and I'm grateful for that. I'm certainly grateful for that. I went from Western High, I went to Western here, then I went to the University of Missouri, and then I came back here and I finished an MFA here at Western years later. And so this school has been good to me. This community has been very good to me, and it continues to be good to me. And I'm just happy that I can share this with you.
Yeah, I'm happy too.
And there's no bullshit in this. This is not bullshit.
All right, thank you. I really do appreciate it.
Have you got enough material there?
That was really informative. I did one before where it was kind of a struggle.
Was it?